Well, hey there, everybody, and welcome back to the HC Conversations podcast. My name is Phil.
And I'm Paul.
And it's good to be hanging out with you all today, whenever and wherever you are watching this. Here's what the next few minutes are going to look like. We're going to do a little recap of the message from this past Sunday in case you missed it. Even if you didn't miss it, just a refresher, maybe include some additional thoughts. And then we're going to maybe meander or pontificate. We're going to pontificate. That's a good word.
That's a good word.
On just some thoughts concerning the recent election. I don't know if you've been living under a rock, but there was an election recently in the US of A. So we're going to talk about that a little bit. All right?
Okay.
All right. But first, Paul, you continued us in this message series, The Not So Secret Sauce, talking about these things in our life and faith that it's like, hey, these are things that we should be living out and doing. And it's not a secret. Like, God's like, here it is, do it. Mm-hmm. And so yesterday you talked to us about self-control.
Yes.
So why don't you tell us about self-control?
So we talked about self-control because self-control is kind of like a keystone habit when it comes to living a life that's full of God, living a life full of faith. It's where we put to death the misdeeds of the body, and we find life. The Apostle Paul talked about this in Romans chapter 8, where he talks about the fact that that we need to put to death the deeds of the body, because the flesh, the way that comes natural to us, it's hostile to God, that it cannot submit to God's law as long as we're living according to that. And then in verse 9 he switches and he says, but that's not you. You've been filled with the Spirit. You are walking by the Spirit. If you have the Spirit of God, he adds a little qualifier, and he's like, but that's not you, but maybe that is you if you haven't been filled with the Spirit of God. Because
you think Paul was taking subtle little shots at people in that
so.
church? He's like, this is obviously you if you're filled with the Spirit. Some of you, we know you aren't. You know who I'm talking to. Yeah. So he's like, yeah, get with the program.
Get with the program. Be filled with the Spirit of God. Walk by the Spirit, and in doing so, you will not gratify the desires of the flesh, Paul goes on to say in his letter to the Galatians. But there's so much power in doing that and learning to live by the power of the Spirit. And I concluded the message by talking about the fact that self-control is like a muscle, that the more we use it, the easier it becomes to practice self-control the next time that we need it. And that self-control wanes as the day goes. So we have more self-control early in the morning and less in the evening. So you want to set yourself up for success. If you know you're going to encounter temptations that later on in the day are going to perhaps, you're not going to have self-control, try to front load your day where you have greater control and can, more easily resist the temptation to those things. Yeah. So we need to practice self-control because that's a keystone habit to the rest of the spiritual life, and practicing more joy, love, gratitude, knowledge. It all comes back to self-control.
Yeah, I like that idea when you talked about self-control as a muscle, because we think about working out. You don't really want to do it a lot of the times, but after you do it, you're like, I'm glad I did that. And then it becomes easier to do. But the same thing with self-control. It's like, as we think about it, in terms of working out, what's easier to do? To go actually, get off work, I'm going to go to the gym and get a workout in, or I'm just going to go mindlessly stare at my phone screen. And how many, it's most people just mindlessly stare at their phones because it's so easy to do. And the same thing with self-control. It's so easy to not have self-control.
Right, the Apostle Paul in Galatians, and I touched on that a little bit, he talks about what comes naturally to us. Mm-hmm.
The works of the flesh.
The works of the flesh, they're obvious. There's laws against those things, but we're not called to live that way. We're called to live by the Spirit, the way of love and joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, gentleness, faithfulness, self-control. That's the way that we're supposed to live according to the Spirit. Against those things, there's no law.
Yeah, and that just brings up that idea again of intentionality. And I think I said last week, I feel like that's going to be such a key in this entire series. Make every effort.
Yeah.
You can't have self-control without making every effort. You don't just stumble into it oh my gosh, man, I'm so self-controlled now. Mm-hmm. You actually have to do the hard things. You're going to wake up and go, I'm going to do hard things today. I'm going to deny myself today. I'm going to die to myself and live for Christ.
Yeah. And I want to say something before you jump in there. And I feel like I keep saying that in this message, but this is one of the reasons why our faith is weak, it's wimpy, it's powerless, is because we're not walking according to the Spirit. The more that we walk in step with the Spirit, the easier it becomes, the more natural the way of the Spirit is. And most of us have never been trained as followers of Jesus to live like that. And so instead, what we're doing is we're saying that we're following Jesus, yet really we're following the ways of the world, the ways of our fleshly desires, which, as Paul said, it's hostile to God. It cannot submit to God. And then we wonder why people are turning away, walking away from the faith, because there's no power in that. They didn't practice a rhythm of walking with the Spirit that leads to life.
It's weird as you were saying that. I just was thinking, no one ever explicitly says this, but for some reason, I think we, as Christians, oftentimes, like we all believe this at some point, that faith should just come natural. Like it should just be easy. Like the whole Christian thing is like, oh yeah, I'm a Christian now. Like I should just kind of fall into this. Like it shouldn't take any work. Like it might even go as extreme to think like if this takes work, then it's not real and I'm not doing it right because it should just happen. And I'm like, no, that's like nowhere in
it should
Scripture.
just happen. I should just be able to believe, always have strong faith. I should be instantly spiritually mature. But the Apostle Paul talks about, number one, that God gives us faith and that we develop faith. And number two, he says, work out your faith with fear and trembling.
Yes, I think
it's something that we have to work out, that we have to do the work. We have to put in the time to develop strong faith. And that's what this series is all about.
See, sometimes I think we make this false dichotomy between what we do and then what God does. So I think with faith, like, well, I shouldn't have to work at it. If it's really faith, it should just happen. It's going to be God working in me and moving in me. And so like, I almost feel like I'm cheating or it's not real faith if I'm doing something. And it's like, no, those two they're not opposed to each other.
That's Gnosticism and mysticism. That's not Christianity.
Because I think it's in Philippians.
Yeah, it's Philippians.
Where work out your faith with your faith with fear and trembling. But that very next sentence, for it is God who works and wills in you. It's like, oh, wait, so do you work it out or is it God? Yes.
We both do it.
Yes. Yeah, God works in us and we join him in that work. And as we join God in the work he's doing in us, he works in us more. And it's just this kind of cyclical thing. Kind of tying into that, one of the things I wrote down that you had said yesterday, that when we dedicate our lives and our bodies to God and his kingdom, I think you might have been quoting, you were summarizing, Willard. When we dedicate our lives and our bodies to God and his kingdom, sin becomes unappealing.
Yeah.
Right? And so the Spirit works in us and gives us these new desires, but we get these new desires as we dedicate ourselves to the things of God. And that idea of sin becoming unappealing, it just made me think of this idea, like we try to stop sinning. Like, I'm just going to stop it. I'm going to stop. I'm going to stop it. I'm going to have self-control. But that doesn't actually work. We have to actually replace it with something that we desire more.
Yeah.
It's not enough just like, I'm going to stop doing that. It's like, no, instead of loving this thing, I'm going to love Jesus more. We put so much, I think, focus on the thing that we're trying to not do or trying to make ourselves do, instead of the focus being on Christ and then our desires kind of falling into line.
Right, and I think I didn't even mention that yesterday, and I wish I would have. I talked about that this is the gospel of Jesus working itself out in us, taking root in us and changing our desires. But I think it begins by first praying, Jesus, let me desire you more. Increase my hunger, my appetite for you over and above this other thing. Because like you said, so often we're told just to stop it, to stop thinking about it, stop doing that thing, but then we never find the thing to replace that with. And ultimately it's a desire for more of Jesus, more of his Spirit. So pray, like we did yesterday in Alpha, pray, come, Holy Spirit. That's a prayer that God always answers. When people pray, Jesus, show me more of you, reveal yourself to me. Yeah. Jesus has a tendency to show up.
Yeah, it's interesting because like any area of life, our actions don't change because our intellect did. Or our actions don't change because we force it. Our actions usually change when our affections change.
Yeah.
Like how many people like change something massive in their lives because they had their first child, and all of a sudden it changes everything because you love that child, or you're in a romantic relationship, or all of a sudden it's like, oh, I got to make these changes. Why? Because my affections changed. When our affections change and it's like, I love Jesus more than anything else, then our actions kind of fall into line. And you quoted, it was a theologian. I don't remember.
Robert Mounts.
Yeah, it said, people do not think themselves into the way they act themselves into the way they think. And I'm like, oh, that is so true.
That's so true.
Yeah.
And then William Barclay, in the next verse in his commentary, he commented that the people that live according to the flesh, it's spiritual suicide.
Yeah.
And I don't remember if I mentioned it in the recorded message or in the first service, but I know people in this church that's you.
Yeah.
That's like, you know what? Life's been tough on me. I'm going to give God the middle finger because I feel like he's giving me the middle finger, and now that's spiritual suicide, because what you're doing is now you're saying no to the way that leads to life, the things of the Spirit, and you're saying yes to the things of the flesh, the things that come naturally, against which there is laws against. And it's so sad as a pastor to see people making those decisions.
Yeah, that idea of like God didn't come through how I thought he should have. And so, I'll go do sometimes I think there's it's a one outright like, middle finger to God intentionally. You didn't come through how I wanted you to. I want to go do this. Sometimes I think it's just like life's been really hard. I deserve whatever. Like I deserve to give into this desire or feed this thing or lose some self-control here. And it's like, that's not going to make things any easier or any better.
No.
Yeah. Thinking of that, like acting, we don't think ourselves into the way we act ourselves into the way we think. And, Scripture has a lot to say about things like this. Again, like our affections and what do we love and how are we actually transformed and why do we engage in the disciplines. Like psychologically, that's very true as well. Is it Jonathan Haidt that talks about the elephant and the rider?
Yeah,
that's like the
the
same
righteous
kind
mind.
of thing. Yeah, it's the same kind of thing. It's like you think you're in charge of the elephant. No, you're just along for the ride. And so you got to get those affections and your actions in line first, and then the rational side of us will catch up.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that was all that I had written down from your message. I just wanted to bring up, and I was like, oh man, yeah, this is so good.
And then I wrapped up the message by talking about just a couple of the scriptures reminding us that I've been crucified with Christ. It's no longer I who live, but Christ who now lives in me. The life I live in the flesh, I live by the Son of God who loved me and gave himself up for me. Yeah. There's a verse from Romans chapter 6 where he also talks about being reminded that we have been crucified with Christ, and that the cross when Jesus was crucified, it was a public spectacle, but Jesus scorned the sin, the shame of the cross, and that for us, whenever we learn to die to our desires, recognizing that the old me has gone, the new me has come, that when I became a Christian, I died to myself, and now I live in Christ, by Christ. Not fully the way that I should be whenever, I'm with Jesus face to face, but yet that resurrection reality has so much power for us today to live the way that Jesus desires and calls us to live. To let that begin to take root in our lives. Let that fact that I've been crucified with Christ. I've put that old man to death. I've crucified it, I've killed it, I've put my crucified flesh on display for the world to see. It's foolishness to those who are perishing. But I know on the other side of that, there's life, there's freedom. So,
it's one of those things I've been convicted by or just struck by a lot. Just like what you're saying, that we never, as Christians, we don't ever graduate past the gospel. Like sometimes it's easy to think it's like, okay, the death and resurrection of Jesus, the gospel, that's like the beginning point of Christianity. And then once I've got that down, well, now give me 5 steps to having self-control, or give me these 3 tips to living a better life. And we can I'll start with the gospel. And goodness, Paul talks about this in Galatians. Like you began, with this, and now you're trying to
right.
earn it. Now you're trying to. It's like no, we never get past the gospel. Like the gospel is everything, all the time. Whether you're talking about self-control or relationships or identity, no matter what. Like we will never get to the end of the depths of the implication of the gospel in our lives. It's like just to stay in that place at the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus.
Yeah.
So it's just like,
Yeah, it has so many implications for our lives. I was telling a coworker yesterday who's not a Christian but is interested in reading the Bible about the Gospels, the 4 Gospel accounts, and then what comes after that, apart from Revelation, is all that working itself out. It's the implications of the Gospel for followers of Jesus, for everyday lives. And most of us who have been in and around the church, we don't see the letters of Paul that way. We don't see John's letters that way. We see it as like, oh, this is nice theology, but it's like, no. Paul was working out what the gospel looks like in everyday life.
Yeah, it's
And
practical.
so we are called to do the same thing.
Yeah, it's good. It's good. Self-control.
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 Let's exercise it. Let's have it. I made the comment in my message yesterday that it's expected and available to all Christians. That this is something that it's not just some wish that we can wish to attain to. It's like, no, this is available to us, and it's expected that we have it. It's not optional.
As you just said that, I don't know what made me think of it. We'll say the Holy Spirit. It's a Christian virtue, like self-control. And it used to just be, even if you weren't a Christian, it's common in our culture to say self-control is a good thing. It seems like that's actually changed.
Oh, yeah.
Like there's something that's actually now in our world seen as virtuous when you let go of all self-control. You know what I mean? Like, you just got to a point and you just had to be authentic. You just had to let it all out there. You just had to, whatever it is. And we almost celebrate that. I'm like, that's weird. That's weird. It's, Christianity has always been strange. And I feel like even in things that just seem normal, it's becoming more strange.
Yeah.
It's strange to have self-control, but good and life-giving to have self-control.
Yep.
So, yeah, be weird. Be self-controlled. All right. Anything else you want to say on the message?
No.
What are we jumping into next week? Teaser.
Next week, we are talking about perseverance.
Ooh, endurance. Perseverance.
Yep.
Long suffering.
We are going to the book of Hebrews for that. So we'll be in Hebrews for that, Hebrews 12. The week after that, we are talking about, I just lost it. I was just looking at it this morning.
Brotherly love.
No.
That's the last week.
Godliness.
Godliness and then brotherly
godliness.
love and affection. Yep. Okay. All right. Yep. Cool. Looking forward to it.
All right. So let's transition now. There's this big thing that happened last week in this country called an election, the presidential election.
So you said there's this big thing that happened, and it just made me think like it's fitting. Like it was the biggest thing that ever happened. Okay. This is probably not the foot we want to start on, but I'm like, can we all just be thankful that we get like four more years of just goofy things to say and make fun of, right? Like people who do Trump impersonations, you get to live on that for 4 more years.
Oh my gosh, Taylor Ransom.
It's hilarious.
He does a great Trump
really
impersonation, and after the election, he's like, you can thank me for this.
I was just like, yeah. All right. Anyway, sorry. You were mid-thought and I cut you off.
No, that was
the biggest election ever.
I was just queuing up our next segment. So
yeah, so there was an election almost a week ago now, because we're recording this on a Monday. And as you're probably all aware, President Trump is now President-elect Trump again for 4 more years. So Trump fans won the presidential ticket, but also like down ballot as well. The Republicans picked up 4 seats in the Senate, I think. They're going to be, they're going to be 53 seats total now.
Yeah, I think so.
And have they taken the House now? Because I know there's still things.
Some of them are still
counting.
waiting to be called,
but
they're trending significantly in that direction.
Yes, and so yeah, it was maybe unexpected in terms of where media, like kind of mainstream media and pundits and stuff were. But I don't know if you took the temperature of the country that it necessarily would have been that unexpected. No. You know?
If you just talk to your average person on the street, they're kind of like, yeah, economy sucks. Government isn't doing anything about it. They don't care about me. They just want to take more of my money.
Yeah. I think that was one of the biggest takeaways for me. Like regardless of the outcome of the election, seeing the election and seeing people's reaction to it, how much there are almost like two separate Americas, and how disconnected, gosh, I don't know how to say it other than like the more elite class, again, we're talking like media and pundits and news and people with higher education, like how disconnected they are from regular middle class, blue collar, lower class. I mean, we're small town Midwest, like what we would call our neighbors in our community. Like that was one of the things that stood out is like how shocked many in the mainstream media, left-leaning media sources were. Like, how could this possibly happen? And I'm just like, you have you've been so isolated in your own bubble for such a long time. That's how this happened.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was going to add anything.
Oh.
I was just agreeing.
I didn't know. I'll just keep talking.
Keep talking.
Because okay, again, I don't even want to get into like, are we glad? Are we not? Whatever. We'll get into some of that maybe, but it was interesting to see the reaction from those that are on the left, or those that were supporting Harris, of all the excuses for why they think the election went the way it did. Anything from like, well, clearly it's just because Americans are like, half of the country is hateful, bigoted, racist, sexist, whatever slur, like obviously all, as it was said throughout, Nazis and garbage and whatever, on and on and on and on. But there was a handful that was like, hey, maybe we should reevaluate what we're saying and what we're believing in, and maybe we have written a whole bunch of people off. And just the vitriol that was like, no, it can't possibly be that. There was a couple of things that I had listened to that one is we were talking about the Pints with Aquinas, the kind of Catholic commentary podcast, and they were talking about post-election, and the one, usually the producer on there was what summed it up just perfectly of just, he's from Steubenville, if you're, probably want to know where that is if you're watching our podcast. Very similar to our area. It's a bigger area, but economically depressed, lower education, addiction, it's like people who are in that situation, as we talk about rural America, as we talk about small town America, as we talk about what's called the flyover states, because you'd fly from the West Coast to the East Coast and just forget about everything that's in the middle. Most people have felt like they're just completely forgotten about. And I feel like that is more of what this election was about. And honestly, the last couple election cycles have been a referendum on the establishment to say, we are tired. I'll say we in this as well. I don't usually get too much into politics, but regardless of politics and who's running and stuff, tired of, if you have like more traditional values and believe in like just kind of how things were, and like I love my family and I love my community and like I'm a follower of Jesus, tired of feeling like we hate you, you're what's wrong with this country, you're stupid, you're backwards, you're uneducated. And so I almost feel that Trump was unique in the fact that he was like a blunt instrument. I almost feel like it was going to come to a boiling point regardless, eventually, of who the candidates were, of a large amount of people saying, we're just done with this. And he ended up, it's like Trump ended up being the person that gave permission to all of the people that feel written off to say, okay, well, that's our guy now. So yeah, that's my best commentary on it, is to say people are just like, yeah, I don't like how things are going, and so we're going to smash things. And I think what shows it is that it's not just a Trump phenomenon. It is the fact that like the Senate is now is Republican. It looks like the House is going to be as well. And we were talking earlier that like Republican and Democrat isn't even necessarily the best way to talk about these things anymore, right? In terms of where things have been for the last 50 years, because the parties have shifted so drastically.
The only thing that I want to add is that just the outrage that I've seen from Christians on social media over the election results. Number one, if you voted for Donald Trump and you are excited and gloating on social media, shame on you.
Yeah, stop it.
You need to have some humility to consider others better than yourself. Because that attitude is sinful as well.
Yep.
For those of you who voted for Harris and you're completely despondent and despairing, and you're a follower of Jesus, where is your hope?
Yeah.
Because right now, to quote the Apostle Paul, you're acting like the pagans who have no hope. And so you need to use this as an opportunity to refocus your attention on both sides to why we're here, to who our real king is, and serve him over and above a political party, a political agenda, a social agenda as well.
Yeah. I don't know if I would add anything else to that. Just like, hey, it is what it is. The election is over. So like you just said, stop gloating and stop whining and just get on with it. Talking specifically to Christians, it's like nothing has changed now for what you are called to versus what it was before the election.
And the marching orders don't change who's in power.
Yeah.
It doesn't change if you're in communist China or if you're in a Democratic Republic of America.
Yeah. So our call is to share the gospel and to live it out.
Yeah, to be faithful.
Yeah. to be faithful. Yep.
Yep. So tune in next week as we talk about endurance and perseverance.
That's right.
And how we can do that
That's
in the face
right.
of perseverance or of persecution.
Yeah.
Not saying that we are persecuted, but that's the context of the letter of Hebrews.
Well, I don't. Yeah, I was going to say, depends on who you talk to, because they just think the world is ending right now. I'm like, okay, we're back into the podcast now. I know we were ending there, but I'm just like, it's just driving me.
I tried, guys.
I just, there's so many things. There's so many things. The fact that, like, hopefully not in the Christian bubble, but this has been inevitably some too, to be like, I know this is such a hard time for you right now. Like, we're going to cancel college classes, and you don't have to go to work today because we know you're so distraught from the election. I'm just like, what the heck is wrong with us as a people? I'm like, we have no idea what real hardship is. Okay, an election didn't go the way you wanted it to. It's quite literally not the end of the world. So you're speaking of endurance, and I kind of cynically was talking to somebody the other day. I'm like, you know what? Quite honestly, what's probably going to happen is 4 years from now, things aren't going to look vastly different than they do right now. Just like they don't look vastly different right now than they did 4 years ago or 8 years ago after the first Trump term. It's like, let's just all push the calm down button and go, okay, life goes on. My life probably isn't going to look vastly different than it would have either way. Let's be faithful and just like live this out. And let's also trust, again, we know who we're talking to. We're talking to followers of Jesus. So wherever you landed, we also have to believe what Scripture says when it says that, like, God has appointed rulers and authorities. And it's like, okay, well.
Read Romans 13.
All right, well, let's get down to it. And again, regardless of who is in charge, let's just do what we're called to do.
And let's read Romans 12.
Yeah.
Where it talks about, the two beasts, the dragon,
Revelation 12.
Yeah, Revelation 12.
Because you just talked about Romans. I get, the R's.
Ours have it.
Did you just make a pirate joke?
I did.
Yeah.
Revelation 12, where you have dragon-manipulated political powers and dragon-manipulated religious powers propping each other up, giving each other power, to see both parties through that lens, that yes, that we hold both these things in tension, that Romans 13, that governments are instituted by God, but yet they are in bed with Babylon, that it is the devil working out, making war against the followers of the Lamb. But ultimately, those powers are falling. That fallen is Babylon the Great, that it will be defeated, that the kingdom of God is coming. It is here now. So let's not lose our focus, lose our hope. And I just have to add one more thing. I know I was trying to end it, and now I'm keeping it going. I don't want to end it, It's just we're having such a good time here. One of the things that I think we're seeing with the great public outcry from those that'll be more on the left is they don't want to admit it, but we talked about this earlier, is that they recognize deep down that the promises of secularism have failed miserably, and they have nothing else to hold on to. So they're grasping at straws, trying to hang on to it. Right. When it's just, it's a mist. There's nothing there to grab onto. Yeah. There can't be a recognition of, we were actually wrong. Most people don't think like this and don't want to go in this direction. Yeah. Like kind of the secular progressive promise of utopia, right? Like if we can just, and honestly from a Christian perspective, if we can just eradicate these silly beliefs in God and like the things that undergird society, and then everything will be okay. And most people have been like, no, we don't think, like even not from a faith position, like there's like some, what would we call like natural law and different things kind of baked in. It's like, well, this isn't what we want to do. And so again, in grappling, like you said, with that reality, many, at least talking head types, instead of saying, maybe we should reevaluate, have just resorted to name calling. Obviously, more than half of the country is sexist, racist, homophobic, bigoted, hate one today. And it's like, in doing that, you're doing the very same thing that you are accusing all those people of doing. Right. And so it's a good time for everyone to reevaluate. Yeah, it's time for everybody to grow up. Put on your big boy pants. Okay. Let's practice some self-control. So, hey, boy, to bring it all the way back around. So
Self-control.
to not live according to the flesh, but to walk by the Spirit.
Okay, church. Be faithful.
That's right. Have a great week.
Have a great week. See you next week.